Hello, students. You are welcome to the second week of this course at Edu321 Psychology of Learning. In lesson 1, we discussed the concept of learning and discussed some of its attributes. We also discussed the stages of the learning process and factors that affect learning. I believe you can now define and clarify the concept of learning and discuss some of its attributes. And you can also discuss the factors affecting the efficiency of learning. You're about to start another interesting lesson. And the topic of the lesson is on theories of learning and their educational implications. Psychologists have tried to explain how people learn and why they learn. They have developed several, they have conducted many experiments, and on the basis of these experiments, they have developed several principles and theories of learning. We're about to discuss all of that. So sit back and enjoy the lesson. Yeah, like I said, the topic for today's lesson is on theories of learning and their educational implications. Theories of learning and their educational implications. I have as the subtitle there, Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning. Among all the theories, we are starting off with Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning. That's why I have it as number 1. Okay. So what are the learning objectives? Learning objectives is, let's say, after completing the lessons of this topic, the 2, you'll be able to define learning theories, what a theory is, be able to define what a theory is, within the context of learning, be able to classify the 2 major groups of learning theory, be able to explain how classical conditioning occurs, be able to discuss the principles of classical conditioning, and we'll be able to explain the educational implications of classical conditioning. Yeah. So, what is a theory? Remember, we are discussing the concept of theory within the context of learning. What is a theory? A theory is a scientific explanation of how learning occurs, how learning takes place. Several theories have evolved about how people learn. In the broad sense, the theories of learning may be classified into 2 major groups: the behaviorist theories and cognitive field theories. Within the context of learning, the theories of learning may be classified into 2, the behaviorist and the cognitive field theories. Let's see there is what distinguishes the 2 major camps of learning theories. Behaviorist theories focus only on external observable behavior to explain how learning takes place. They believe that learning is the connection between stimulus and response. And that is why they are also known as stimulus response theory or SR theory. The main proponents of these theories, that is the main proponent of the behaviorist theories, include Pavlov, Thorndike, Skinner, and Bandura. And there are various theories that they propounded. For instance, Pavlov's theory is known as the theory of classical conditioning. Skinner's theory is known as the theory of operant conditioning. Thorndike's theory is known as the theory of connectionism. And Bandura's theory is known as the social learning theory. These four set of personalities belong to the camp of the behaviorist theory. Then we come to the cognitive field theories. What is their ideology and how do they explain learning? The cognitive field theories pay more attention to what goes on inside, to what goes on in the learner's mind, and focus on mental processes rather than observable behaviors. That of the behaviorists focus on observable behaviors. Cognitive field theories focus more attention on what goes on inside the learner's mind and on mental processes of the learner. Okay, let's do this. Like I said, we're starting off with a Pavlov's theory of classical conditioning. Like I said earlier on, Pavlov belongs to the group of behaviorist theory. Pavlov. Okay, who is this Pavlov? Ivan Pavlov was a Russian psychologist who propounded this theory of classical conditioning. And what is classical conditioning? Let me just give you a general background of what classical conditioning entails. In classical conditioning, a person or animal learns to associate a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus that naturally produces an unconditioned response. As a result of this association, the previously neutral stimulus comes to elicit the same response and thus becomes a conditioned stimulus capable of eliciting a conditioned response by itself. Yeah, at this stage, you may not understand. I'm just building a background. We are going somewhere. This is just the introductory part of this lesson. As time goes on, you will get to, it will become clearer to you. So don't worry if you don't understand what this statement of the various concepts that have been mentioned in that sentence. Don't worry, you will get to understand everything by the end of this lesson. But I want you to note, some of the abbreviations that have been used in this opening background in describing Pavlov's theory. Some of these terminologies include NS, neutral stimulus. NS, neutral stimulus is the sound of the bell. UCS, unconditioned stimulus. present the food. Please, all of these abbreviations are also included in this opening that sentence describing what classical conditioning entails. So as time goes on, you will get familiar with those terminology. UCR is the unconditional response, and that is salivation. CS also sound of the verb that became a conditioned stimulus. It's a neutral stimulus that became a conditioned stimulus. Then the CR, conditioned response, it is salivation that resulted from the learned response to the previously neutral stimulus. The explanations are already given, so just get used to some of these terms, some of these abbreviations in relation to Pavlov's theory. They will help in the theory of classical conditions. Having explained that, let's move on. Okay, we are still building a background. So, okay, let me here, yeah. Okay, yeah, Pavlov was a scientist in psychology working on a research study. Now, I'm just describing what motivated this going into the propounding this theory of classical conditioning. While conducting a research, Pavlov noticed that the dogs in his in his research study, would salivate to the sound of the footsteps of the people coming to give, bringing food to the dog, and not just the sight and smell of the food. So he became curious and decided to conduct an experiment on this. Let's take a look at how classical conditioning works. Let's take a look. Okay, we are still on this slide. Yeah, Pavlov, like I said, decided to conduct an experiment in line with his observation. He presented food to one of his dogs, and the dog salivated, which is natural. It's a natural occurrence, that salivation in that sense. It's a reflex action. When you are hungry and you see the sight of a delicious food, the likelihood is that your mouth will start watering, you will start salivating. It's a natural reflex. It's a natural reflex. There is no learning involved here. No learning, it just occurs naturally. So, secondly, Pavlov decided to ring a bell, and the dog did not salivate. It was so natural. That ringing of the bell, we refer to it as neutral stimulus. Neutral stimulus, because it did not trigger a response. That's why he called it neutral stimulus, NS. Then he went further. He proceeded to link the food, the ringing of the bell with the food. So what he did was to ring the bell and then present the food to the dog. He did it again, present the food to the dog. He did the presentation he rang the bell and presented the food multiple times. He didn't just do it once. He did it multiple times so that the dog will start to associate the ringing of the bell with the presentation of the food. So after repeatedly hearing the sound of the bell, before getting the food, the dog began to salivate as soon as the bell rang. After a while, the dog learned to salivate to the sound of the bell alone. Thus, the sound of the bell, which was previously a neutral stimulus, became a conditioned stimulus capable of eliciting a conditioned response by itself. Just be following through. Don't get confused. Don't get confused as we progress in the course of this discussion. Everything will become clearer. So I'm still building a background. The previous slide and this slide, they are still a background. Now let's go to the real issue now. I want you to note that there are three phases of the classical conditioning process. Three phases are involved. Three phases. Let's look at it. In phase one, that is before the conditioning, it just involves Pavlov presenting the food. So, which triggers, to the dog, yes, which triggers a salivation response. This salivation response is a natural and automatic trigger. And at this first stage, there is no learning involved because the stimulus and the reaction that was triggered was a natural occurrence. Food and salivation. No learning involved. It was not, it was unlearned. It was a reflex action. So during phase two, that is the stage of the conditioning, the reconditioning. Listen to this. So during the second phase, the sound of the bell was presented to the dog, and it did not salivate. It did not salivate. Now, the sound of the bell was now paired with the food. That is, Pavlov presented the sound of the bell, he rang the bell, and immediately presented the food and gave the dog. So as time went on, the dog started to associate the ringing of the bell with the presentation of the food. Started to associate them together. At this point, the ringing of the bell becomes the conditioned stimulus. And this stage is what Pavlov referred to as the conditioning stage. This is where the conditioning occurred at phase two. So if I ask you, can you describe the conditioning stage? Where did it, at which stage of the conditioning process did it occur? Just tell me, just describe what happened at that stage. In stage two, just for you to describe what happened at stage two. The conditioning phase involves pairing a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus, that's the food. The food is an unconditioned stimulus. Please try to get used to this terminology as used in Pavlov's experiment. Eventually, the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus. So let's look at the third phase. What happened at the third phase? So, having associated the presentation of the bell, the ringing of the bell, with the presentation of the food, the ringing of the bell alone now started to invoke the salivation response, even without the presentation of the food, even without the food. The Pavlov noticed that the dog, the just mere ringing of the bell, the dog was able to salivate. So it is at this stage you can say learning has occurred. The dog has learned to salivate at the sound of the bell alone. Wow, that's good. Just ordinary ringing of the bell, the dog started to salivate. Okay, so that is the learning stage. The dog has come to learn to salivate at the sound of the neutral stimulus. And mind you, the neutral stimulus is the sound of the bell. And then Pavlov also noticed, we have explained the three phases of the conditioning process. So this one is aside. After some time, Pavlov Pavlov was just ringing the sound of the bell because he too was excited by the mere ringing of the bell, triggering the salivation response. So he started doing it. Every day he will ring the bell and no presentation of the food. It was not accompanied with the food. So as time went on, the tendency of the dog to salivate gradually diminished until it finally stopped. And at this stage, Pavlov called it the extinction stage. That is the extinction stage. So he also pointed out that to make the dog recover from extinction, it must be presented with the food again. So once you start presenting the food again, the dog will recover from extinction. Very interesting experiment, isn't it? Yeah, so we have described the three phases of the conditioning process. Let's summarize the steps as follows. This is a summary of the steps. Like I said, the first stage involves giving food. When food is placed in the dog's mouth, salivation takes place. We have agreed on that. And that response is a reflex action. No learning was involved. It is natural. It's natural. For number two, Pavlov paired the sound of the bell and food to the dog, and the dog salivated. That was what we said. And it is at the second phase that the conditioning state was achieved. Then the third stage, this is just a summary of what we've been describing on the line. At the third stage, Pavlov then withdrew the food and presented only the sound of the bell alone. The dog salivated. At this stage, learning has occurred. The dog has learned to salivate at the food, at the sound of the bell alone. And the said extinction stage, of course, when the sound of the bell is no longer accompanied with the food. And to make the dog recover from extinction, it must be presented with food again. Now, when we come for the live class, I want you to take note of this question for discussion. We are going to discuss it. At what stage was conditioning completed? And at what stage did extinction set in? Please take note of that. It's a question for discussion. We are going to discuss that during the live class. For conditioning to take place, several factors are necessary from what we have seen. The duration of time. Like I've said, the CS, that is the sound of the bell, the conditional stimulus is the sound of the bell. The CS, remember at this stage, at the final, after the whole experiment, is no more neutral stimulus. It has assumed the role of a conditioned stimulus. The sound of the bell and the food must be paired together. Should not space them. There should be temporal relationship between the bell and the food. The food should come immediately after the sound of the bell. is presenting. It should come. That's when the effect of the classical conditioning will take effect. That's when the classical conditioning process will be achieved. Then another factor that is necessary, that is important in the whole experiment, is the motivation. The dog must be hungry. If the dog is not hungry, salivation might be difficult to come back. It might be difficult for the dog to salivate. So the dog has to be hungry for the salivation response to take effect. Then repetition is another factor. There must be repeated hearing of the sound of the deaf's ears and the food UCS, unconditional stimulus. There must be repeated hearing. You have to do it repeatedly. Like Pavlov, they just do it once. You have to do it, you have to hear it. If you want the dog to begin to associate the two stimuli, that is the sound of the bell and the presentation of the food. So you have to do it repeatedly so the dog will learn to associate the stimulus with the two stimuli, associate them together. That's when the salivation response can take effect. Then what are the educational implications of Pavlov's classical conditioning theory? Are there aspects of this theory that we educators can adopt in our classroom situation? Let's look at educational implications of Pavlov's classical conditioning theory. Classical conditioning primarily influences emotional behavior. Things that make us happy, sad, angry, and so on become associated with neutral stimuli that gain our attention. For instance, if a teacher beats any child excessively, then that child will begin to fear that teacher. Even at the mention of that teacher's name, the name alone can evoke fear in the child. I remember when I was in secondary school, there was a particular teacher. Once the name is mentioned, even without the presence of that teacher, students will be running, helter-skelter. Once you just mention, oh, this person, once you just mention the name of that teacher, everybody. Even apart from fearing the teacher or the teacher's name, the teacher's name evoking fear in the child can also transfer this fear to the school in general. So even taking a test, that test for that subject that the teacher teaches. So that's how the classical conditioning can influence emotional reactions in students, even in adults. So fear, love, and hatred towards specific subjects are created through classical conditioning. Yes, sometimes you notice that some the children or students hate certain subjects. They hate, and this was created through classical conditioning, through the process I've just explained under the first scenario. For example, a math teacher with a defective method of teaching and improper behavior in the classroom may be disliked by learners. The learners develop hatred towards math due to teachers' behavior. On the contrary, the good method and kind treatment of a teacher can bring desirable impact upon the learner. So that's a wake-up call. Most of these implications are a wake-up call for us teachers to be mindful of our behavior in the classroom. Don't use corporal punishment. There are other means of disciplining students. We shall come to that probably, I think, in is it third week or fourth week or fifth week? Fourth week, the fourth topic, when we'll be treating the Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. We shall discuss in detail the different the consequences of corporal punishment on children and students and other effective methods of discipline that we can use at home and in school. So the fourth point of the educational implications, classical conditioning can be used for developing a favorable attitude to subjects. Just as a student can hate a subject because of the way the teacher treats the student, the same way classical conditioning can be used for developing a favorable attitude to subjects, teachers, and above all, the school. Teachers are able to apply classical conditioning in the class by creating a positive classroom environment to help students overcome fear or anxiety. Teachers, as teachers, we should be able to create a positive classroom environment so that students can enjoy learning and schooling. The fourth point, principles of classical conditioning are very helpful in developing good habits in children. Cleanliness, such habits as cleanliness, punctuality, and respect for others can be developed through this process. Bad habits can also be eliminated through conditioning. Last point, some school subjects are learned more adequately through the process of conditioning. For instance, reading, writing, spelling, and mathematics. Mathematics such as multiplication tables are learned more effectively through the process of conditioning. Okay, so yeah, let me leave you with this class activity. In classical conditioning theory, how does a neutral stimulus become a conditioned stimulus? Then fill in the missing words. In the classical conditioning theory, the unconditioned stimulus is, fill it in, is dash. The conditioned stimulus is the dash. The unconditioned stimulus is dash. And the conditioned response is dash. So attempt this class activity. So in summary, we have said the theories of learning may be classified into two major camps: the behaviorist theories and cognitive field theory. Behaviorist theories focus only on external observable behaviors to explain how learning takes place. And the proponents include Pavlov, Thorndike, Skinner, and Bandura. And we have started off with Pavlov. Cognitive field theory of learning pays more attention to what goes on in the learner's mind and focuses on mental processes of the learner. We then went on to explain how classical conditioning works and the educational implications of the theory. I hope you did enjoy the lesson. Until I come your way again, it is goodbye.